Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to draw a Jack Russell type dog in pastels. Now the first thing that I like to do is start off with the eye. Now I'm here just building up a nice base foundation, gradually darkening my layers so that I've really captured the contrast right from the beginning. Now I really want to be focusing on how that light catches the eye, so the bright reflection at the top, the shadows, that's what's going to help to build up the sphere shape. Now when it comes to working on the surrounding fur, this is where I really want to focus on first of all getting a well blended base layer. So what I'm going to start off with is just using a combination of my pastel pencils to really hint at my main lights and darks. Now if you have pan pastels you can of course use that for your base layer, but I wanted to use the pastel pencils here because where I fitted both dogs on this portrait, this Jack Russell was a little smaller and I wanted to make sure that I was very accurate with where my lights and my darks were positioned. So that's the only reason why I decided to just use my pastel pencils. Now this does prove that you don't need all of the pastel supplies in order to create photorealistic work. You can just do that just with the pencils on their own. Now if you are using any combination of pastels, whether or not it's soft pastel sticks, pan pastels or the pencils, the layering process is really important. Now at this base layer stage we want to be paying very close attention to not to fill in the tooth of the paper. So this ensures then that if we've got plenty of tooth left that we can continue to add those layers as we go and maximise the depth that we create. Now if the tooth of the paper is filled early on, then it means that the pencil won't have anything to grip to, so you may feel like it's almost a little bit slick and that the pencil details are not visible. So if that is happening, that's an indication that the tooth of the paper has been filled. Now as you can see here, this base layer, I'm just hinting at my lights and my darks. As I continue to build my layers, that's where I'm going to then perfect more of the colour. Now I like to really focus on the values, the importance of the lights and the darks. I feel that that makes my artwork more realistic rather than worrying about the exact colour. Now colour selection is of course important, but I just like to focus more on my values initially, and as I've said I do find that the colour comes with that portrait the more that the layers are incorporated in that drawing. But if colour selection and how to pick those pencils based on the many that we may have in front of us is something that you would like to see covered in some real-time step-by-step tutorials, then I've got lots available on my Patreon channel. I'll link that in the description below if it's of interest. Now this tutorial is also available there all in real time. There are no sections sped up or cut out. So again, as I say, I will link all of that in the description below. But if you've got any questions, then feel free to pop them in the comments and I'm more than happy to help if I can. Now once I built up a nice base foundation, that's when I can start focusing on the details and reinforcing more of that fur texture. Now this dog, it wasn't necessarily a very coarse fur like a border terrier, but it still did have a little bit more of that wiry texture to it. But there is a degree of softness as well. So I had to make sure that I was creating a balance between the two textures and using a combination of details and softening and blending techniques. Now in order to get the range and balance of fur textures, how we use the pencil, how we hold the pencil, how much pressure is applied to the pencil, all of this comes into consideration. Now there is no one specific technique for each portrait, it's going to depend on the animal that we're drawing. But you'll see that most of the time I'm holding that pencil at least in the middle or the end of that barrel. I don't ever hold it right up close to the lead. This there is going to help for me to get a bit more freedom of movement on that pencil, get a little bit better purchase and also able to use that lighter pressure. Now those three factors make a big difference in how natural those pencil strokes are going to look. Now alongside pencil technique we've also got the layering process, and as you can see here I'm working in small sections and I start with a base, I then start to refine that layer and then build up my details. This is something that I really like to pay very close attention to, and at this stage here I'm also reinforcing the fur direction. Now I've got a video here on YouTube, it's my top tips for drawing realistic fur in pastels. I'll link that in the description below if it's of interest. But there I talk about three main things regarding pencil technique. That is fur length, fur thickness and fur direction. Now as you can see here, the fur direction, it curves in quite a few different ways, and that's because the fur is longer and is able to overlap in different sections. So I want to be making sure that I've captured the fur direction in any of those key changes where I have space to. Now I say that because it's really important. This is a little bit more of a smaller size scale because I have fitted both dogs on this portrait, but you can still see here that I'm able to curve my pencil strokes in a way that makes it look like it's curving over the structures under the skin. Now the fur direction is not random, it follows the underlying bone and muscular structure. So if we don't curve those pencil strokes right to get that fur direction accurate, then we will end up changing the shape of the face. Now the layering process and how we pick the layer to start with first and how we build up from there again is going to vary depending on the texture. But typically when you're working with longer fur that does overlap other sections, we want to be focusing on what is behind that fur first. Now the wonderful thing about working with pastels is we have that flexibility to layer light over dark, or we can go back with our dark pencils back over those lighter layers. This gives us maximum flexibility with how we're going to layer that fur. So if we do have a lighter clump of fur that's sitting on top of something that's darker, we can really split that up into two main processes. And once that's broken up, that's when we can then work on individual layers, and as you can see here, we might have to add maybe 10, 11, 12 layers. It really does vary, but it's all about building up those layers in stages. And that's the key, it's a gradual process. We can't expect to capture this much realism by just drawing 2 or 3 layers. Now one main factor that's made this easier to tackle is the fact that I've broken it up into smaller sections, so only maybe 1 or 2 square inches at a time. If I was to work on one whole layer for the entire dog and then do another layer and so on, I know that I'm going to skip real important layers, especially the midtones, and I'll end up having a tendency to jump to my lightest highlights. Now if I do that on top of my base layer, look at all of that depth that we're going to miss out on. All of those key values, those very subtle shades that help to build up the softness and therefore the depth within that fur. But if you're spending more time looking at your reference photo, back at your artwork, and you're hesitating, you're not quite sure where you should be, then that is an indication that you're working on too much of a larger area. Try to scale that down, work on one little bit at a time, and you'll find that then it should be far easier to approach and work through in a much more effective way. Now as I'm continuing to layer here, you can see how I'm always changing that contrast. Each layer that I'm starting to add, I'm really reinforcing those highlights. But I'm not jumping to my brightest highlights first. I'm now using a white pencil, but it doesn't necessarily look white because I'm using it to tint the layers underneath. Now depending on how you use your white pencil, you're going to get a range of values. If you do have any areas that are particularly bright, like the reflections in the eye for example, then it's always worth putting a little bit of white down first so that you know you've got that as bright as needed. Now onto the neck and chest portion of this portrait, and as more of this develops you can see that it's a softer texture compared to the face. So I really do want to be making sure that I'm blending those layers of pastel, but I'm not over blending. Now over blending can happen very easily with pastels because they do blend so well, but we want to be making sure that we're aware of how soft that should be. If we overblend, then we're going to completely lose that definition in the fur, which for something like this would be a real shame. We wouldn't end up capturing that fur texture as closely and accurately as we could. So as I start to build up my pencil layers here, look at how I'm reinforcing the fur direction, the way that it overlaps. Sometimes it's just an individual strand of hair that curves in an opposite direction. Now the fur length is decided by how long that pencil is in contact with the paper for, and of course that's going to vary massively depending on the animal that we're drawing. But there is no one set length of fur on one portrait. So for example, the fur on the ear of this dog is significantly shorter than anywhere else on the face or the body. So I had to make sure that for that reference photo, I was replicating the length of those pencil strokes accurately. Now the width of those pencil strokes, the thickness of those pencil strokes is going to be determined by a couple of factors. How sharp the lead is, how much pressure is applied to the pencil, even how we're holding and moving the pencil. Those factors are going to play a big role in the thickness of those pencil strokes. Now the thickness of the pencil strokes is in this case going to help determine how soft that fur is. Now if I do accidentally create a detail that's too harsh, I will just come in and soften it. But I want to be making sure that I'm using the right technique to start with to try to eliminate any additional textures that I don't want. Now what I mean by that is where I do want this to have a little bit of softness to it, if I create too many finer details, I'm going to give it more of that wiry, coarser look. So having that balance between length of pencil strokes and the thickness of the pencil strokes is going to help to replicate more of that realism. And again, I'm breaking this up into very small sections because I don't now want to start rushing it. Where I know I'm coming to the end of this portrait, I want to still make sure that this one section is given the right amount of time. You can see that I've just gradually started to extend where it fades out because I felt like here I needed a little bit more of the chest included to give a better balance and composition. Now this is something to judge at the time, but I do like to plan all of my portraits on the computer first, so I'll just design a little layout so that I have an idea of where I want the animals to be positioned, to where I want their chest faded out, and so on. It just means then that there's less guessing involved, and therefore we save the art supplies and potential mistakes. So just designing it on a computer, or you could do a little freehand sketch in a sketchbook, it just gives you an idea of whereabouts you're going to stop that body on the dog, and where of course I say you position that on your paper. And in order to capture this fur texture correctly, all of the things that I've mentioned here, they come together to form the entire picture, and it's not all about one specific technique. The softening, the pencil technique, the layering process, everything here has its purpose. So if you would like to see how to create this in that real-time step-by-step tutorial, then that is all linked in the description below. So I do hope that this video has been useful. If it was, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and a thumbs up. It makes a huge difference to my channel. And I also upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week. So if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. If you've got any art related questions, feel free to pop them in the comments below because I'm more than happy to help if I can. And I'm going to be uploading another video to YouTube next week. But as always, thank you so much for watching.